On the afternoon, meant to celebrate our daughter's graduation, my marriage ended in front of everyone we knew, and the man who planned the moment believed he was in control. What he did not know was that the ending he announced publicly was not the ending I had prepared privately, and that his certainty would last only a few hours before everything he built began to break. My name is Bianca Caldwell. I was married to Gregory Caldwell for 28 years, and we had one daughter, Amelia. That day, we were seated in a private dining room of an upscale restaurant filled with relatives, colleagues, and longtime friends who had watched our family grow. Amelia sat beside me in her graduation gown, her cap resting on the empty chair behind her. Gregory stood at the head of the table with a champagne glass raised, smiling as if this was another performance he had rehearsed. The room quieted when he cleared his throat. People leaned forward, expecting a toast about Amelia's achievement, about pride and family and the future. Instead, Gregory announced that he was leaving me and starting a new life. He spoke calmly, confidently, as if he were delivering a business update rather than ending a marriage in public. Conversations stopped. Silverware froze midair. Every face turned toward me, waiting for tears, shouting, or collapse. I did none of those things. I congratulated him on his honesty, thanked everyone for coming, and smiled. The reaction unsettled him more than anger ever could have. From the corner of my eye, I saw Cassandra Wells sitting among our friends, shifting in her chair. She had been part of our social circle for years. She had attended holidays, asked me for advice, and smiled at my daughter like family. That was not new information to me. I reached into my handbag and placed a sealed envelope beside Gregory's plate. He asked what it was, still smiling, still confident. I told him it was something to read later. Then I turned to Amelia, kissed her cheek, and told her how proud I was of her. I reminded everyone that the day was still about her accomplishment. After that, I stood, smoothed my dress, wished the room a pleasant afternoon, and walked out. The heat outside felt sharp and grounding. I welcomed it. Behind me, the restaurant doors opened and slammed shut. Gregory's voice followed, raised and unsteady now, demanding to know what I had done. I did not turn around. The envelope already contained the first piece of what I had been preparing for months. For most of our marriage, Gregory was the dreamer, and I was the one who kept things running. I managed the finances, planned for our daughter's education, and covered the gaps when his ambitions shifted. I delayed my own plans repeatedly, telling myself there would be time later. 3 months earlier, small irregularities in our accounts caught my attention, transfers that did not belong, explanations that did not add up. I did not confront him. I watched, documented, and followed every detail quietly. Gregory believed I trusted him without question. That belief became his greatest mistake. As I drove home from the restaurant, my phone vibrated with messages I did not answer. I parked in the driveway of the house Gregory believed he would be leaving that night for the last time. Inside, everything looked normal. Upstairs, his bags were already packed, hidden where he thought I would never look. I sat down, opened my laptop, and continued exactly where I had left off. The public announcement was over. The real story had just begun. Gregory returned home less than an hour later, still wearing the confident expression he had carried at the restaurant, though it was already beginning to crack. He walked through the front door calling my name, expecting an argument, a confrontation, or an explanation that would let him regain control. Instead, he found me seated at the dining table with my laptop open, reviewing documents as if nothing unusual had happened. He demanded to know what was inside the envelope. I told him he already knew, even if he had not read it yet. He tore it open with shaking hands and scanned the first page. The smile disappeared immediately. His voice changed as he asked how long I had been planning this. I answered honestly that I had not planned revenge, only preparation. He accused me of ruining Amelia's day. I reminded him that he had chosen the timing himself. Gregory tried to dismiss the papers as meaningless. He said divorce filings could be contested and that lawyers would undo whatever I thought I had arranged. He spoke quickly, stacking confidence on top of denial. I let him talk. When he finished, I told him that the accounts were already flagged and that temporary restrictions would activate by morning. His face tightened. He asked how I could possibly do that without his consent. I reminded him that I had been managing our finances for decades, and that signatures did not always matter when evidence existed. His phone rang repeatedly. He ignored it at first, then finally checked the screen. Cassandra. He stepped away to answer, lowering his voice, but I could still hear fragments. He promised things were under control. He said it was just a misunderstanding. He said I was overreacting. When he returned, his confidence had thinned further. I told him he should leave for the night. He laughed and said this was still his house. I agreed that it was still his house, but only for now. I explained that he had until the following evening to remove his belongings. After that, the locks would be changed. He stared at me as if waiting for emotion to surface. None did. Gregory shifted tactics. He talked about our history, about sacrifices, about years that could not be erased with paperwork. I listened until he finished, then told him that none of that changed the decisions he had already made in secret. He accused me of being cold. I said nothing. His phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. The conversation ended abruptly. He asked me what I had told the leasing office about the apartment he planned to move into. I told him the truth. The application had been flagged due to incomplete financial verification. The agent had called our home. I had responded. He stood in silence, processing this new problem. I packed a small overnight bag and told him I would be staying elsewhere. As I reached the door, he asked what would happen when people found out. I told him they already would. That night, the story he had planned began slipping away from him, one quiet consequence at a time. I spent that night at Diana's house, but I did not sleep. Messages continued to arrive from people who had been at the restaurant, each one revealing how quickly Gregory's announcement was spreading. Some asked if I was all right. Others wanted explanations I did not give. I replied only to Amelia, telling her I loved her and that we would talk soon. Everything else could wait. By morning, the first restrictions activated exactly as scheduled. Gregory discovered it when his card declined while paying for breakfast. He called me immediately. I did not answer. He tried again, then again. When I finally responded, I told him to check his email. The notification from the bank explained the temporary limits and the upcoming review. It was written in neutral language, but the meaning was clear. He arrived at the house shortly after, furious and pacing. He demanded access to the accounts and accused me of acting without authority. I reminded him that the irregular transfers had triggered an internal review and that this was no longer only my decision. He asked who else knew. I told him the process did not require announcements. It required records. Gregory tried to explain the transfers as temporary arrangements. He said he was moving money for future investments and that everything would have been returned. I asked why none of those movements had ever been disclosed to me. He did not answer directly. He said I was misinterpreting things. I opened my laptop and showed him a simple timeline of transactions, dates, and destinations. He stopped talking. He then asked how long I had known about Cassandra. I told him I had known long enough. He reacted with disbelief, then anger, then something close to fear. He asked what else I had collected. I told him only what mattered. He accused me of spying. I reminded him that joint accounts leave trails whether you look for them or not. His phone rang again. This time he stepped outside to answer. When he returned, his voice was strained. Cassandra had questions. She wanted to know why funds were frozen and why the apartment was suddenly unavailable. Gregory said he would handle it. He asked me to reverse the restrictions temporarily. I refused. He warned me that this would become ugly. He said lawyers would be involved and that I was overplaying my hand. I agreed that lawyers would be involved. That was the point. I told him he should contact one immediately. He hesitated, then said he already had someone in mind. I knew he had not. Before leaving, he asked what I planned to tell Amelia. I said I planned to tell her the truth when she was ready to hear it. He asked me not to poison her against him. I said I would not need to. As he left, another message arrived, this time from my attorney, confirming that the emergency filings had been accepted for review. The timing was precise. Gregory still believed he could negotiate his way out. He did not yet understand that the story he had written for himself no longer belonged to him. Amelia came to see me that evening. She did not ask questions at first. She sat across from me, watching my face as if trying to understand when everything had shifted. When she finally spoke, she asked why her father had chosen that day, in that place, in front of everyone. I told her I did not know his reasons, only his actions. She said he had hugged her that morning and told her how proud he was. That detail stayed with me. I explained only what she needed to hear. I told her there had been things I discovered months earlier and that I had handled them quietly. I did not mention documents or evidence. I did not mention Cassandra by name. Amelia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said she needed time. I told her she could take all the time she wanted. That night, Gregory sent a long message apologizing for the way things had unfolded. He said he had planned to speak to me privately later and that the announcement had not gone as intended. I read it once and did not reply. An hour later, another message arrived, shorter and more direct. He asked if I would meet him the next morning to talk calmly. I replied that my lawyer would be in touch. By morning, the pressure had intensified. Gregory's attorney contacted mine, requesting immediate access to financial records and arguing that the restrictions were excessive. My attorney responded with the documentation I had prepared. The reply came back slower this time. Gregory was learning that urgency did not create leverage. Cassandra called me directly that afternoon. I let it ring twice before answering. She said she was confused and that Gregory had told her I was overreacting. She asked if the frozen accounts were temporary. I told her she should speak to Gregory. She asked if I had known about their relationship. I said yes. There was a long silence before she hung up. An hour later, Gregory arrived unannounced. He said Cassandra was threatening to leave. He said this situation was spiraling out of control. He asked me to confirm to her that things would be resolved soon. I told him I would not involve myself in their relationship. He accused me of doing this to embarrass him. I told him embarrassment was not my objective. Accountability was. He then tried a different approach. He said we could delay everything for Amelia's sake. He said we could present a united front until she settled into her new job. I asked him why he had not considered that before making a public announcement. He did not answer. Before leaving, Gregory asked what else I had submitted with the filings. I told him the minimum required. That answer unsettled him more than a threat would have. He left quickly, checking his phone as he walked. That evening, my attorney forwarded a notice confirming that a preliminary hearing date had been set. I did not feel relief. I felt readiness. Gregory still believed he could contain the damage. Cassandra still believed she was entering a stable future. Neither of them yet understood how much of their plan was already exposed. The next morning, Gregory stopped calling and started sending messages instead. Each one carried a different tone. One sounded apologetic, another sounded threatening. A third tried to sound reasonable, asking if we could settle things quietly before they became public record. I read them all and did not respond. Silence unsettled him more than confrontation ever had. By midday, my attorney confirmed what I already expected. Gregory's legal team had requested an emergency review, but the request was denied pending the preliminary hearing. The financial trail was too clear, the pattern too consistent. The money had not moved randomly. It had moved with intent. Gregory had assumed no one would ever look closely. That afternoon, a notification appeared confirming that additional accounts connected to Gregory were now under review. I did not initiate that step. The bank did. Once a pattern is flagged, it does not stop at the first discovery. Gregory learned this when another payment failed, this time one he had promised to Cassandra. He called immediately. His voice was strained when I answered. He said things were getting out of hand and asked me what I wanted. I told him I wanted the process to proceed exactly as it should. He asked if I was trying to destroy him. I told him I was allowing consequences to arrive on their own. He accused me of enjoying this. I reminded him that I had warned him months ago, indirectly, when I asked about unexplained transfers. He had laughed it off then. Later that evening, Cassandra showed up at the house. Gregory had already been there, trying to retrieve more belongings. I arrived while they were both inside. Cassandra asked me directly if Gregory still had access to the funds he had described to her. I did not answer her question. I told her she should ask Gregory why he had needed secrecy in the first place. Gregory tried to cut the conversation short, but the damage was already done. Cassandra asked about the transfers, about the accounts she had never heard of, about why the apartment was no longer available. Gregory attempted explanations that did not align with what she already knew. She left shortly after, telling him she needed space. Once she was gone, Gregory lost his composure. He accused me of sabotaging his future deliberately. I told him his future had been built on lies and that structures like that collapse on their own. He said I was calculating. I told him calculation was what had kept our family stable for years. That night, my attorney sent confirmation that the court had accepted the evidence submission in full. The preliminary hearing would move forward without delay. Gregory sent one final message before midnight asking if there was any way to stop this. I did not reply. For the first time since the restaurant, Gregory began to understand that this was no longer a situation he could manage with confidence and charm. The narrative was shifting, and he was no longer controlling which details surfaced next. The morning after Cassandra left, Gregory's tone changed completely. The messages stopped sounding angry or strategic and started sounding urgent. He asked to meet in person, said misunderstandings were growing, and insisted that things were being taken out of context. I told him any communication should go through the attorneys. He ignored that boundary and came anyway. He arrived with papers in his hand, claiming they proved the transfers were temporary. I looked at them once and pointed out the dates that contradicted his explanation. He said timing could be explained. I asked why the explanations had never been shared before. He had no answer. He said I was focusing on details instead of the bigger picture. I told him details were the only thing that mattered now. Later that day, my attorney called to say Gregory's lawyer had requested an informal settlement discussion before the hearing. The request came with urgency and very little confidence. We agreed to listen, not negotiate. Gregory's side needed time. Time was no longer available. By evening, the story had reached people outside our immediate circle. Someone from Gregory's professional network contacted me privately, asking if the rumors were true. I replied with one sentence saying legal proceedings were ongoing. That was enough. Gregory's credibility was beginning to weaken where it mattered most to him. Cassandra contacted me again that night. This time she did not sound confused. She sounded cautious. She asked whether the legal filings mentioned her name. I told her the documents focused on finances and timelines, not emotions. She asked whether Gregory had ever discussed the prenuptial agreement with me. I told her he had insisted on it himself. She went quiet before ending the call. Gregory arrived again after that call. He asked what Cassandra had said to me. I told him she had asked questions he should have answered months earlier. He accused me of interfering. I reminded him that secrecy had always been his method, not mine. He then made a mistake. He admitted that he had delayed telling Cassandra about certain financial limits because he believed things would be resolved quickly. That admission confirmed exactly what the documents already showed. He had been managing two versions of reality, and both were failing. That night, Cassandra sent him a message asking for proof of stability before continuing the relationship. Gregory forwarded it to me, asking what he should do. I told him nothing. This was not a situation that required advice. As the day ended, my attorney forwarded a notice confirming that additional disclosures would be required at the hearing. Gregory would need to explain not just what he had moved, but why. The web he had created was tightening, not because I pulled it, but because it had been there all along. By the end of the night, Gregory was no longer talking about plans or futures. He was talking about damage control, and even that was slipping out of reach. 2 days before the preliminary hearing, Gregory finally hired a lawyer with experience in family law. The change was obvious immediately. The messages from his side became formal, measured, and cautious. Requests replaced demands. Questions replaced accusations. That shift told me everything I needed to know. Someone had finally explained the situation to him clearly. My attorney informed me that Gregory's lawyer wanted to challenge the validity of the agreement Gregory himself had insisted on years ago. They were arguing that time and shared assets had weakened its force. The argument was expected. The evidence I had gathered was already prepared to counter it. That afternoon, Gregory called despite knowing he should not. His voice was lower, controlled, but strained. He said he had not realized how serious the financial exposure was. He said he thought the agreement was outdated. I reminded him that documents do not expire simply because someone forgets them. He asked if there was any version of this where we both walked away intact. I told him there had been, before he made his plans in secret. Later that evening, Cassandra contacted Gregory again. This time, she did not ask questions. She told him she was stepping back until everything was resolved. Gregory tried to convince her this was temporary. She did not agree. The message ended without reassurance. He forwarded it to me without comment. I did not respond. The following morning, my attorney sent me the final confirmation. The evidence package had been accepted without objection. The court would review the transfers, the undisclosed accounts, and the timeline of events as a single pattern, not isolated incidents. That distinction mattered. Gregory's actions were no longer viewed as mistakes. They were viewed as strategy. Gregory arrived at the house again, this time quieter than I had ever seen him. He asked if I truly intended to go through with everything. I told him that intention had left the equation the moment he chose secrecy over honesty. He asked what would happen if the court ruled against him. I told him exactly what the agreement outlined. He already knew. For the first time, Gregory did not argue. He sat silently, staring at the floor, calculating losses instead of gains. When he finally spoke, he said he had underestimated me. I told him he had never tried to understand me at all. That night, Cassandra moved her remaining belongings out of the apartment she and Gregory had planned to share. The lease was never finalized. The future he had described to her no longer existed. By the time Gregory realized this, there was nothing left to negotiate. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Gregory still believed he might regain control inside the courtroom. What he did not understand was that control had already shifted long before anyone would speak before a judge. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with no warning calls and no last-minute negotiations. Gregory did not try to contact me before we entered the courthouse. That silence was new. It told me his lawyer had finally advised him to stop speaking. Inside the hearing room, Gregory sat beside his attorney, avoiding my eyes. He no longer looked confident or angry. He looked alert in a way that comes from realizing every word can cause damage. When the judge reviewed the filings, there were no dramatic objections. The discussion focused on dates, amounts, and disclosures. That was enough. Gregory's lawyer argued that the transfers were not meant to conceal assets, but to prepare for a business opportunity. My attorney responded with the timeline, showing how those transfers coincided with private communications, apartment inquiries, and large personal purchases that were never disclosed. The judge asked Gregory a single question about why the accounts had not been reported. He hesitated before answering. That pause mattered. The ruling was brief. The court ordered the existing freezes to remain in place and expanded financial discovery. Gregory would be required to disclose all accounts, liabilities, and transfers made during the past 2 years. Failure to comply would carry penalties. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Outside the courtroom, Gregory finally approached me. He said the judge had been unfair. I told him the judge had been precise. He said the hearing had gone worse than expected. I told him expectations were not evidence. By the time he left, messages were already spreading. Friends who had remained neutral were beginning to ask questions. Business contacts stopped replying to his calls. The version of himself he had carefully maintained was starting to fracture. That afternoon, Cassandra sent Gregory a final message. She said she could not be part of unresolved legal issues and financial uncertainty. She wished him well and asked him not to contact her again until everything was settled. Gregory showed me the message without comment. He did not ask for advice this time. Later that evening, my attorney confirmed what Gregory feared most. Additional inconsistencies had surfaced during the court review. The transfers were not isolated. They formed a pattern that supported intentional concealment. Gregory would now have to explain decisions he had assumed would never be examined. That night, Gregory sent one final message asking if I had planned this from the beginning. I replied with a single sentence. I planned for the truth to matter. As the day ended, the story Gregory had designed collapsed completely. The hearing was not the end. It was the point where everything he had hidden became impossible to control. After the hearing, Gregory stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding and started acting like someone cornered. He no longer spoke about fairness or history. He spoke about survival. His messages became short and focused on outcomes. He asked what would happen next and how long the process would take. I told him the timeline was no longer mine to control. That afternoon, my attorney informed me that Gregory's disclosures were already incomplete. Accounts he had mentioned verbally did not match the records obtained through the court request. This was no longer a matter of interpretation. It was a problem of omission. Gregory was given a deadline to correct it. He arrived at the house that evening without warning. He said his lawyer had advised him to cooperate fully and that he needed access to old records. I told him he could submit requests through proper channels. He said time was critical. I told him it had been critical months ago. Gregory then admitted something he had never said out loud before. He said he had moved money because he believed I would never leave and never look closely. He said he assumed I trusted him too much to question anything. I told him trust does not eliminate accountability. It only delays it. His phone rang while we were speaking. This time, it was his bank. He stepped aside to take the call. When he returned, his face had changed. Another account had been flagged for review due to inconsistencies between reported income and recent transfers. He asked if I had alerted them. I told him the court had. That night, messages from Cassandra stopped completely. Gregory tried to contact her anyway. The messages went unanswered. The silence unsettled him more than rejection would have. He had built his future on the assumption that someone would be waiting on the other side. That assumption was gone. The next morning, my attorney sent me a copy of the court's updated request. Gregory was now required to explain not just where the money went, but what he had told me about it at the time. That distinction mattered. It turned private decisions into documented contradictions. Gregory called me immediately after receiving the notice. He asked if there was any way to limit the damage. I told him the only way to limit damage was honesty, and that option had already passed. He accused me of enjoying watching this unfold. I told him enjoyment had nothing to do with it. Completion did. By evening, Gregory's tone shifted again. He asked if we could meet one last time without lawyers. I declined. The situation no longer allowed for informal conversations. Everything needed to be recorded now. As the day ended, Gregory sat alone in a situation he had engineered carefully and lost control of completely. The story was no longer about betrayal or anger. It was about exposure. And exposure, once it begins, does not slow down. By the end of that week, Gregory's world had narrowed to deadlines and unanswered calls. The court ordered a second review after discrepancies appeared between his sworn disclosures and the bank records obtained independently. This was no longer about what he intended to do. It was about what he had already done and failed to explain. Gregory's lawyer requested a private meeting through mine, framing it as a chance to avoid further escalation. We agreed to attend with counsel present. Gregory arrived early, restless, holding a folder that looked overstuffed and disorganized. When the meeting began, his lawyer spoke carefully, acknowledging gaps in the disclosures and promising cooperation. My attorney asked one question: why certain transfers aligned exactly with apartment deposits and personal purchases that were never reported. No one answered immediately. Gregory finally spoke. He said he planned to explain everything at the full hearing. My attorney responded that explanations come after disclosures, not before. The distinction mattered. The court had already noted the pattern. Delays now suggested concealment. During the meeting, a new issue surfaced. Gregory had guaranteed a payment tied to a business obligation using funds from an account he had not disclosed. That obligation was now under review as well. His lawyer paused, then asked for a break. When they returned, the tone had changed. The request was no longer to negotiate terms, it was to manage fallout. Later that day, Gregory called me directly, ignoring instructions again. He said the situation was becoming impossible. He asked if I would consider a settlement that ended discovery early. I told him discovery ends when the truth is complete. He said the pressure was affecting his work. I told him consequences do not pause for convenience. That evening, a message arrived from a mutual acquaintance asking whether Gregory was in financial trouble. I did not respond. The question itself confirmed what Gregory feared most. The story was leaking beyond the courtroom. The next morning, my attorney forwarded an update. The court had approved expanded discovery, including third-party verifications. Gregory would not control which documents surfaced next. He would only respond to them. Gregory sent a message asking if I remembered the early years of our marriage when we promised to protect each other. I did not reply. That promise had already been broken, and nostalgia could not repair it. As night fell, Gregory faced a reality he had never planned for. He had assumed he would announce his exit, manage the reaction, and step into a new life cleanly. Instead, every decision he had hidden was now being examined in sequence. The thrill he once felt at controlling the narrative had vanished. The process was moving forward without him now. And for the first time, Gregory understood that nothing he said next would stop it. The first person to choose a side openly was Gregory's sister, Diana. She did not announce it publicly or send dramatic messages. She simply stopped returning Gregory's calls and contacted my attorney instead. When Gregory found out, he accused me of turning his family against him. I told him I had not asked anyone to do anything. People decide for themselves when they see enough. Diana requested access to documents Gregory had once asked her to store for him years earlier. She said she wanted to be certain about what she was protecting. When she reviewed the records, she found gaps Gregory had never mentioned. She forwarded everything to my attorney without notifying him first. That decision mattered more than she realized. Gregory confronted her that night. He demanded to know why she was interfering. She told him she was done covering for him. She reminded him that she had warned him months earlier when she noticed his behavior changing. He had promised her it was nothing. That promise collapsed along with the rest. The fallout reached Amelia the next morning. Gregory tried to meet her privately, believing he could still control that relationship. Amelia listened, but did not argue. When he finished, she asked one question. She asked why he had hugged her on graduation morning, knowing what he planned to do hours later. Gregory did not answer. Amelia left without saying anything else. That silence broke him more than any court order. He called me repeatedly after that meeting, saying Amelia would not answer his messages. I told him she was allowed to decide how much access he had. He accused me of influencing her. I told him she was reacting to his actions, not my words. By afternoon, Gregory's lawyer contacted mine again, this time requesting a delay. The reason cited was emotional strain. The request was denied. Emotional strain is not a legal argument. That evening, Gregory showed up at Diana's house unannounced. She did not let him inside. She told him she loved him but would not lie for him. That conversation ended their relationship as it had existed for decades. Later that night, Cassandra's name appeared in a new filing, not as a target but as a timeline reference. Gregory saw it and panicked. He called her despite her earlier request. She did not answer. He sent multiple messages explaining, apologizing, promising clarity. None were returned. The circle around Gregory tightened quickly after that. Family support faded. Personal reassurance disappeared. What remained were documents, deadlines, and silence. He had assumed people would protect him out of loyalty. Instead, loyalty shifted toward the truth. By the end of the day, Gregory was no longer fighting me. He was fighting isolation. And isolation, once it begins, gives no warnings before it closes in. The moment Amelia stopped responding to Gregory, he understood something had shifted that could not be argued away. He tried again the next morning, sending messages that sounded careful and restrained, asking if they could talk privately without lawyers or assumptions. Amelia did not reply. Instead, she came to see me. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She asked me to confirm whether everything Gregory had been accused of was true. I told her the truth, without interpretation or justification. I told her about the accounts, the transfers, the planning, and the timing. I did not tell her what to feel. I let the facts stand on their own. When I finished, Amelia said she needed to hear it from him. I warned her he would try to reframe it. She said she already expected that. That afternoon, she met Gregory in a public place. He arrived early, rehearsed, and ready. She arrived with one question written down. She asked him whether he had planned to leave before her graduation and simply waited for the right moment. He paused too long before answering. That pause ended the conversation. Amelia told him she could not trust someone who could stage honesty while hiding intention. She said she would not take sides in court, but she would not defend him either. Gregory tried to argue that relationships were complicated. Amelia told him deception was not complicated, it was deliberate. She left before he could respond. Gregory called me immediately after. His voice was unsteady. He said Amelia would not listen to reason. I told him reason requires consistency. He asked me to talk to her. I refused. That relationship was now his responsibility alone. That evening, my attorney forwarded another update. Gregory had submitted revised disclosures. They still did not align with third-party records. The court flagged the inconsistencies and issued a warning. The language was formal, but the meaning was clear. His credibility was eroding. Cassandra contacted Gregory once more that night. The message was brief. She said she had learned details he had never shared and that she was removing herself permanently from the situation. She wished him well and asked him not to contact her again. Gregory did not respond. He forwarded the message to me without comment. The next morning, Amelia sent Gregory a final message. She said she needed distance and time, and that trust would not be rebuilt through explanations. Gregory read it and did not reply. For once, he had no response prepared. By the end of the day, Gregory had lost access to more than accounts and plans. He had lost the only audience whose opinion still mattered to him. The court would decide finances. The public would decide reputation. But Amelia had already decided something far more final. And there was no appeal for that. After Amelia stepped back, Gregory stopped pretending this was a temporary crisis. His messages grew shorter and more precise. He asked about numbers, percentages, and timelines. Emotion disappeared from his language completely. He was no longer trying to fix relationships. He was trying to limit loss. His lawyer proposed a settlement that evening. The offer arrived framed as reasonable and efficient. It asked to end expanded discovery in exchange for concessions that sounded generous on the surface, but avoided explaining the missing transfers. My attorney rejected it within an hour. Gregory had not yet accepted that discovery was no longer a bargaining chip. The following day, the court issued a formal notice requiring sworn explanations for several discrepancies already identified. These were not general questions. Each one referenced a specific date, amount, and destination. Gregory could no longer answer broadly. He would have to explain each decision individually. Gregory came to see me after receiving the notice. He did not argue. He asked directly whether I would testify about the conversations we had when those transfers occurred. I told him I would answer whatever the court asked. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. He then tried something new. He said he would accept full responsibility if I agreed not to pursue certain claims. I told him responsibility does not come with conditions. He said the exposure would damage him permanently. I told him exposure reveals what already exists. That afternoon, Gregory's lawyer withdrew from one aspect of his representation, citing irreconcilable differences. He retained new counsel by evening. The change delayed nothing. The deadlines remained the same. By nightfall, Gregory's business partner contacted me quietly, asking whether the court review might affect shared obligations. I told him the court was examining personal actions, not partnerships. He thanked me and ended the call. The fact that he asked at all told me the concern had already spread. Later that night, Gregory sent a message that did not ask for anything. He said he had underestimated how much information could be reconstructed from records alone. I did not respond. That realization was his to carry. The next morning, my attorney forwarded confirmation that the court had approved subpoenas for additional records. These would arrive directly from institutions Gregory did not control. The scope had widened again. Gregory called once more after receiving that notice. His voice was calm but hollow. He asked whether there was any version of this where it stopped escalating. I told him escalation ends when nothing remains hidden. By the end of the day, Gregory had exhausted every approach he knew. Negotiation had failed. Pressure had failed. Silence had failed. What remained was documentation moving forward without pause. The story he once believed he could manage through timing and confidence had turned into something mechanical and relentless, and it was no longer waiting for him to catch up. The subpoenas changed everything. Once third-party records were requested, Gregory stopped trying to anticipate outcomes and started reacting to them. Each new document that arrived removed another layer of explanation he had relied on. His lawyer warned him repeatedly to answer only what was asked. Even that became difficult. Within days, inconsistencies appeared between Gregory's sworn statements and the records received from financial institutions. Small differences at first, then larger ones. Dates that did not align. Amounts that shifted, transfers that had no stated purpose. The court issued a notice requesting clarification. The language was neutral, the implication was not. Gregory's professional circle noticed before the public did. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unanswered. One scheduled partnership review was quietly canceled without explanation. Gregory asked me whether I had spoken to anyone. I told him the court did not require my assistance to uncover patterns. Records speak on their own. That evening, Gregory sent a message asking if I had ever doubted him during our marriage. I did not reply. Doubt was no longer relevant. Evidence was. The following morning, my attorney forwarded an update that confirmed what Gregory feared. The court had identified potential misrepresentation in one of his disclosures. This did not mean a ruling yet. It meant scrutiny would intensify. Gregory would now be required to explain not only what he did, but why earlier explanations did not match the facts. Gregory arrived again that afternoon, visibly restrained but clearly unraveling. He said the pressure was affecting his work and that people were starting to distance themselves. He asked whether I understood how quickly reputations collapse. I told him I understood how easily they are built on assumptions. He asked if I would agree to a joint statement to control the narrative. I told him there was no narrative left to control. The court had one. He accused me of letting this destroy him. I told him destruction was not the goal, disclosure was. That night, Cassandra's name surfaced again, not through messages, but through records. A payment tied to a purchase she had benefited from appeared in a newly released statement. Gregory saw it and said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. By the end of the week, Gregory's lawyer requested another delay. This time, the reason given was the need to review newly obtained materials. The court denied it. The schedule would stand. As the documents continued to arrive, Gregory's confidence disappeared entirely. He was no longer speaking about outcomes or strategies. He was asking how long the process would last and how much more could surface. The answer to both questions was the same. As long as there was more to uncover, it would continue. And by then, Gregory understood something too late. Once exposure begins, it does not need intention to keep moving forward. The full hearing date was confirmed the following Monday. There would be no further delays, no private resolutions, and no opportunity to narrow the scope. Everything uncovered would be reviewed together, not as separate mistakes, but as a sequence of choices. Gregory learned this when his lawyer explained that the court was no longer interested in explanations, only verification. The night before the hearing, Gregory sent a message asking if I planned to speak. I told him I would answer questions when asked. He asked whether I intended to describe how the money movements had affected me personally. I told him the court would decide what mattered. That answer unsettled him more than any accusation. At the hearing, Gregory attempted to regain composure. He answered clearly at first, relying on prepared explanations. But as documents were introduced, those explanations began to contradict each other. A transfer described as temporary was linked to a purchase. A business expense aligned with a personal commitment. Each contradiction was addressed calmly, one at a time. The judge did not interrupt often. When she did, it was to clarify dates and intent. Gregory hesitated more than once. Those pauses were noted. His lawyer attempted to redirect, but redirection no longer worked. The record spoke louder than any argument. When my testimony was requested, I spoke only to what I knew. I confirmed timelines, conversations, and disclosures that had never occurred. I did not speculate. I did not accuse. I answered questions and stopped. The absence of emotion was deliberate. By the end of the hearing, the court issued a preliminary ruling. The agreement would be enforced as written. The financial transfers constituted concealment. Asset division would proceed under the terms Gregory himself had signed years earlier. Additional penalties would be considered if further discrepancies emerged. Gregory did not react immediately. He sat still as the ruling was read, as if waiting for a final sentence that never came. When it ended, he looked toward me, not in anger but disbelief. He had expected negotiation until the end. There was none. Outside the courtroom, Gregory asked whether I felt satisfied. I told him the process was not about satisfaction. It was about resolution. He said he had never imagined it would end this way. I told him it had not ended yet. That afternoon, my attorney confirmed the immediate consequences. Gregory would lose access to several assets he had assumed were secure. The timeline for final division was set. There would be no appeal on the enforcement decision. By evening, Gregory stopped messaging entirely. For the first time since the restaurant, there was no attempt to explain, negotiate, or reframe. The outcome had been decided, not by emotion, but by sequence. The story Gregory once controlled had reached its turning point. And from that moment forward, everything moved in only one direction. The ruling changed how people spoke to Gregory almost overnight. Calls that once came easily stopped coming at all. Messages went unanswered. Meetings were postponed without rescheduling. The consequences did not arrive dramatically. They arrived quietly, one closed door at a time. Cassandra did not contact him again. Instead, Gregory learned through someone else that she had already moved on. The future he had described to her no longer existed, and once the financial reality surfaced, there was nothing left for her to wait for. Gregory did not argue when he heard this. He did not ask questions, he already knew why. 2 days after the hearing, Gregory's lawyer informed him that additional discrepancies had surfaced during final review. They were not large enough to change the ruling, but they were enough to eliminate any remaining leverage. Gregory authorized full compliance without protest. He had stopped trying to shape outcomes. That afternoon, Gregory came to the house one last time to collect what remained of his belongings. He did not ask for more time. He did not argue about what stayed or went. He packed quietly, aware that every item he removed marked something he would not return to. Before leaving, he asked if I planned to sell the house. I told him I had not decided. He nodded as if that answer confirmed something he had already accepted. He said nothing else. Later that evening, my attorney sent confirmation that the final asset inventory had been approved. Gregory's share was reduced exactly as the agreement specified. There were no surprises. The document reflected what had already been determined in court. The following week, Gregory attempted to secure temporary financing for a business obligation. The request was denied after routine checks. The denial did not mention court proceedings. It did not need to. The records were enough. Amelia did not contact Gregory during this time. She focused on her work and avoided discussions about the case. Gregory asked me once whether she had said anything. I told him she had not. By the end of the week, Gregory's world had become small and carefully managed. He no longer spoke about rebuilding or future plans. He asked only about timelines and compliance. He followed instructions without resistance. The man who had once planned his exit with confidence had reached the point he never anticipated. There was no audience left, no negotiation left, and no version of the story he could still control. What remained was the final stage. And unlike everything before it, this part would move forward without him present. Once Gregory was gone from the house, the process moved faster. The court no longer needed clarification or follow-ups. Everything required had already been submitted. What remained was execution. Accounts were divided, ownership transferred, and obligations reassigned according to the ruling. Each update arrived as a short notice, precise and final. Gregory contacted me once during that period. He asked whether I planned to contest anything further. I told him I had no reason to. The terms were clear. He asked whether I believed the outcome was fair. I told him fairness had never been the variable. Documentation was. That same week, Gregory's business partner formally dissolved their agreement. The notice cited financial uncertainty and reputational risk. Gregory did not contest it. He signed and returned the document without comment. The speed of that decision told me he had stopped trying to preserve appearances. Amelia remained distant. She did not speak about her father, and she did not ask questions. When she visited, our conversations focused on her work and her plans. Gregory noticed this silence and asked whether she was angry. I told him anger was not the issue. Distance was. Another filing arrived confirming that Gregory would be responsible for liabilities tied to the undisclosed transfers. The court did not frame it as punishment. It framed it as correction. Gregory acknowledged receipt without objection. Days later, Cassandra's name appeared again, this time indirectly. A third-party statement confirmed that a purchase Gregory had denied involvement in had been linked to his account. The court noted it and moved on. There was nothing left to debate. Gregory's final attempt at communication came late one evening. He asked whether I believed any of this could have ended differently. I told him it could have if the truth had come before the planning. He read the message and did not respond. By the end of the month, the legal process was nearly complete. Gregory had complied with every remaining request. He did not challenge timelines or outcomes. The man who once controlled meetings and announcements now waited for instructions and followed them carefully. The story was no longer unfolding in dramatic moments. It was closing through quiet confirmations and irreversible decisions. Each notice marked another line crossed, another option removed. Gregory had assumed the most dangerous moment would be the announcement. He had been wrong. The most dangerous moment was the one where everything he had hidden became orderly, visible, and permanent. And that moment had already passed. The final hearing was scheduled without ceremony. There were no witnesses left to call and no arguments left to refine. The court had everything it needed. Gregory arrived alone this time. He did not look around the room or attempt conversation. He sat and waited. The judge reviewed the remaining points quickly. Asset division was confirmed. Liability responsibility was assigned. Compliance deadlines were restated. Gregory acknowledged each item without objection. When asked if he understood the final order, he answered clearly. There were no pauses this time. The ruling was issued in full. The marriage was legally dissolved. Ownership transferred immediately. Remaining joint access ended that day. The language was formal and complete. There was no room left for interpretation. Outside the courtroom, Gregory approached me once more. This time, he did not argue or negotiate. He asked whether I believed he had ruined everything beyond repair. I told him damage is not measured by regret, but by what cannot be restored. He nodded, as if that answer confirmed what he already knew. He then asked a final question. He asked whether I had ever planned to leave before discovering what he had done. I told him no. That truth unsettled him more than accusation ever could. He thanked me for answering and walked away without looking back. Later that afternoon, my attorney confirmed the final execution order. All remaining transfers were complete. Gregory's access to shared systems was terminated. There would be no further hearings, no pending reviews. The process was finished. Gregory sent one last message that evening. It contained no questions and no requests. He said he hoped Amelia would speak to him someday. I did not reply. That decision was no longer mine. The next morning, Amelia sent me a short message asking if everything was officially over. I told her yes. She replied with one word acknowledging it. That was all she needed. By the end of the week, Gregory had moved into a small apartment under a short-term lease. The business he once described confidently was being restructured without him. He did not announce anything publicly. There was nothing left to announce. The man who once believed control came from timing and performance had reached the only moment that mattered. The one where the audience was gone, the outcome was final, and silence replaced explanation. There would be no next move for him, only adjustment. And for the first time since the restaurant, the story no longer followed Gregory at all. Once the case was closed, information stopped arriving in waves and started arriving in fragments. Short confirmations, final notices, small updates that confirmed nothing would be revisited. Gregory complied with each requirement without delay. There was no resistance left to offer. His absence became noticeable in ways that did not require explanation. Invitations stopped coming. Group messages continued without him. People adjusted quickly, not out of cruelty but convenience. Gregory had assumed relationships were permanent. He learned they were conditional. A former colleague contacted me quietly to ask whether the proceedings were truly finished. I told him they were. He thanked me and said nothing more. That same day, Gregory was removed from a professional board he had once chaired. The notice cited restructuring. No reasons were given. None were needed. Gregory attempted to restart parts of his business independently. The effort lasted weeks, not months. Without access to previous capital and without partners willing to wait, the structure failed to stabilize. Gregory did not announce the closure. It simply stopped operating. He reached out once more, not to negotiate or explain, but to ask whether I had already moved forward. I told him I had. He asked how. I said through planning, not reaction. He did not reply. Amelia remained distant but steady. She did not speak about her father unless asked, and even then, only briefly. When Gregory sent messages, she read them without responding. The silence was consistent. It did not fluctuate. That consistency unsettled him more than rejection. One evening, Gregory sent a message asking whether I believed time would change anything. I told him time changes conditions, not facts. He read the message and left it unanswered. As weeks passed, Gregory's presence faded from daily relevance. Updates about him came indirectly and less frequently. Someone mentioned he was considering relocation. Someone else said he had downsized again. The information arrived without urgency and without reaction. The shift was complete. Gregory was no longer part of the narrative that had once centered him. He existed separately now, outside the sequence of decisions and outcomes that had defined the past months. The most unsettling part for him was not loss, it was irrelevance. The realization that life continued smoothly without adjustment or commentary, that no one was waiting for explanations or reversals. By the end of that period, Gregory stopped reaching out entirely. There were no final messages, no last questions. The connection dissolved without ceremony. The story that began with a public announcement did not end with one. It ended with silence, distance, and the certainty that nothing would be reopened. And that silence held more weight than anything Gregory had ever said aloud. Life did not reset after everything ended. It reorganized. Systems changed. Roles disappeared. Space opened where tension used to exist. The absence was noticeable, but it was not disruptive. It was efficient. Within weeks, all remaining administrative ties were closed. Gregory's name was removed from shared records, memberships, and authorizations. Each confirmation arrived quietly, requiring no response. The process was complete in a way that did not invite reflection. It simply ended. Amelia settled into her work fully. She did not ask about her father, and I did not bring him up. When he sent messages, they remained unanswered. Over time, the messages stopped. Not because of conflict, but because there was nothing left to say that would change anything. Gregory attempted to re-enter familiar spaces once. He reached out to old friends and former colleagues. Most responded politely. None re-engaged deeply. The version of himself they had known no longer aligned with reality, and people rarely rebuild trust once patterns are clear. Months passed without direct contact. When Gregory finally reached out again, it was brief. He informed me he was relocating for work. There was no request and no expectation of response. I acknowledged the message and wished him well. That exchange marked the final closure. The man who had once orchestrated his departure publicly had left quietly instead. There was no audience and no announcement. The exit he had planned theatrically became something ordinary and unnoticed. What remained was not victory or revenge, it was order, accounts balanced, ownership clarified, relationships aligned with truth instead of assumption. The tension that once required management was gone. The story did not conclude with a dramatic confrontation or final speech. It concluded with continuity. Daily routines resumed without disruption. Decisions were made without hesitation. The future no longer required caution. Gregory's greatest mistake had not been the affair or the announcement. It had been believing that control came from performance instead of preparation. By the time he realized otherwise, every outcome was already fixed. The ending he feared most was not loss. It was being unnecessary to the story that continued without him. And that story moved forward, complete, stable, and untouched by what he had left behind. You have reached the end of the text.